Hello there, and welcome to the Outside Views weekly magazine on global politics. After the general election, US President Joe Biden emphasized his willingness to work with the Republicans. Democrat Biden said on Wednesday at the White House in Washington that he was ready to compromise on many issues. However, he warned that he would veto any Republican law aimed at banning abortion nationwide or undermining health care. He also hopes that after the election, they will continue to support Ukraine together, said Biden. Among other things, the USA is the most important supplier of weapons for the country, which has been fighting against the aggressor Russia since the end of February. Republicans announced before the election that there would be no blank check for Ukraine if they won the majority. Biden stressed that his Democrats could still defend the majority in the House of Representatives. We have the opportunity to keep the House of Representatives. That's what Biden also said on Wednesday, and until now, I don't know if that's true. At the same time, he admitted, though, but it will be very tight. Biden only sees his predecessor Donald Trump as a minority among Republicans. The voters demonstrated in this election that they don't want to go through a political battle every day. And he obviously doesn't believe that Trump's MAGA Republicans can be liberated from their delusion. But he thinks that they are a minority in the Republican Party. When a reporter at the White House press briefing preceded a question about Trump by stating that his political movement was still strong, Biden slipped a mocking, "Oh yeah?" MAGA, or Make America Great Again, is the slogan with which Trump entered the White House in 2016. Biden has now given his supporters the nickname MAGA Republican. The Democrat is expected to decide early next year whether he will run again in 2024. In my opinion, we will make a judgment early next year. That's what he also said on Wednesday regarding knowing that Trump will do some statement next week. Biden wants to run again in the presidential election. Ultimately, it's a family decision. I think everyone wants me to run, but we'll discuss it, he said. He's in no hurry and he will make a decision dependent on what his predecessor is doing, he said. And with that, he refers to Trump and his grand speech next week. Biden has repeatedly said in the past that he wanted to run again for the highest office in the state. He's already 79 years old, but he also made it clear that such a decision would depend on his health, among other things, understandably in that age. Surprisingly, strong Democrats and a furious victory by Republican Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in the U.S. midterm elections are putting ex-President Donald Trump under pressure. And before Trump's expected re-election to the White House or re-running for the White House, a number of Republicans he supported lost the vote now. And meanwhile, DeSantis, who's considered Trump's main intra-party competitor for the 2024 election, showed strength with a dominant lead it was more than 20 percentage points. And due to a tight key race, it was initially unclear which party would be able to win the majority in the chambers of Congress. We might only know on Saturday. According to the Indonesian government, Russian President Vladimir Putin will not be attending the G20 summit in Bali next week. Instead, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will travel to the meeting of the 20 major industrialized nations on the Indonesian island. That's at least what a spokesman for the Ministry of Investments responsible for coordinating the summit announced on Thursday. However, it is possible that Putin will attend the summit virtually. His program is still being worked out. That was said by the head of protocol at the Russian embassy in Indonesia. As the host of the summit, Indonesian President Joko Widodo announced a peace initiative for Ukraine. Indonesia will invite everyone to sit down and engage in constructive dialogue. That's what he said at the end of October. Widodo also invited Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to the summit, even though the country is not a member of the G20. Zelensky said he would not travel to the meeting if Putin attended. Zelensky denounces Russia as a terrorist state and calls for the aggressor's exclusion from the G20 group, in which Moscow is not completely isolated given supporters such as China, India, and Turkey. US President Joe Biden wants to talk about red lines between the two countries at a possible meeting with China's President Xi Jinping at the G20 summit next week. Biden said on Wednesday that he wants to know what Xi believes are China's crucial national interests to determine how that might conflict with US interests. Biden thus indirectly confirmed his plans to meet Xi on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Indonesia next week. It would be the first face-to-face meeting between Biden and Xi in their offices as presidents. However, both of them already know each other, among other things, through their time as vice presidents of their countries. And talking about Chinese President Xi Jinping, he says his country's security situation is unstable. Therefore, he wants to invest more in the military and in training. So China's President Xi Jinping warns of security challenges. The state broadcaster CCTV quoted the head of state as saying that the security situation was becoming increasingly unstable and uncertain. The People's Republic will therefore comprehensively strengthen military training and war preparations. Since Xi came to power in 2012, he has set China on an increasingly authoritarian course. Priorities are security, government control of the economy in the name of the common prosperity, more assertive diplomacy, and a stronger military. In addition, the takeover of the democratically governed island Republic of Taiwan is being sought. Xi, who expanded his power base at the CCP convention last month, sees the US as an international rival and pursues expanding China's international influence. The Speaker of the US House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, has defended her mandate in the midterm elections. That was what the broadcaster CNN and the news agency AP declared when they declared her the winner of the vote in her constituency in the US state of California on Wednesday night. In 2018, she took over the presidency of the House of Representatives for the fourth time. She has represented her constituency in Parliament since 1987. A few days ago, Pelosi told CNN that a decision about her political future would also depend on the attack on her husband Paul a good 10 days ago. While Nancy Pelosi was in Washington, a man broke into the couple's San Francisco home during the night. When the police arrived, the man hit her husband with a hammer. Paul Pelosi required surgery for a fractured skull. The assailant later testified that he intended to crush Nancy Pelosi's knee. Iranians have been demonstrating against their government for weeks now. They see the US, Iran sees the US and the EU behind it. A notorious militia is now demanding a tougher approach to Germany. In Tehran, the tone has become sharper towards Germany. In an open letter to the Iranian Foreign Ministry, several student organizations belonging to the notorious Basij militias are calling for measures to be taken against German diplomats. This is reported by the Fars news agency. The appeal followed an increasingly hostile stance by hardliners in Iran towards European countries. With the identification of the serious role played by some embassies in the recent unrest, including Germany and England, the scene of the confrontation has changed, the letter said. The Basij-e Mostasafin, mobilized of the oppressed in English, is a paramilitary force in Iran, formed after the Islamic Revolution in 1979 and recruited from young sections of society. This militia plays a central role in suppressing protests in the country. The militia is part of the Revolutionary Guards and is said to have several 100,000 supporters loyal to the system. The state is obliged to stand up to the enemies in diplomatic clothing, as they put it. The question here is it sufficient to simply subpoena the ambassador in such an environment where national security is the target of the shameless actions of these embassies? Well, it was not immediately clear what action they were calling for instead. After the nationwide protests broke out, Iran's leadership had already blamed EU states and the USA for the protests. But the trigger for the system-critical mass protests in Iran was the death of the 22-year-old Iranian Kurd Mahsa Amini. The Vice Squad arrested her for allegedly violating Islamic dress codes. The woman died in police custody on September 16th, and since her death, thousands have been demonstrating across the country against the government's repressive course and the Islamic system of rule. According to reports, talks between a US security advisor and Putin confidants were going on behind the scenes. It was probably about a de-escalation of nuclear tensions. According to a newspaper report, US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is trying to de-escalate nuclear tensions in the Ukraine war. Over the past few months, Sullivan has had confidential talks with Kremlin advisor Yuri Ushakov and Secretary of the Russian Security Council Nikolai Patrushev, which have not been publicly disclosed. That was reported by the Wall Street Journal. The talks took place as the government in Moscow escalated its nuclear rhetoric, repeatedly accusing Ukraine of planning to use a radioactive dirty bomb without solid evidence. The Kremlin declined to comment on the Wall Street Journal report. Ukraine has repeatedly stated that it does not intend to use such a bomb. In return, the government accused Russia of having such plans itself in order to then blame Ukraine for the use of these weapons, which are banned worldwide. And I really believe the Russians would do something like that. Sullivan has previously said publicly that Russia would pay a heavy price if nuclear weapons were actually used. It is currently unknown what a concrete response from the West would look like, though. China is presenting a new model of a fighter jet at an aerospace trade fair this week, which should also be able to attack targets from or even in space. The model, called Ultravik, is said to be a design for the so-called sixth generation of fighter jets. That was reported by the German newspaper Welt. The jet is said to be able to carry out long-distance flights in weightlessness, that means in space. The fighter jet exhibited at the Zhuhai Air Show has 2 engines and space for 1 pilot. The fair was held from November 8th to 13th in Zhuhai, that's China's tourist spot. It's not clear to what extent there is further information about the Ultravik in the meantime. On social media, the jet has been compared to toy planes like the ADF-01 Falcon and movie machines like the FA-37 Talon. If the jet were actually designed for use in space, it would need special propulsion technology. The models with the currently highest stakes were developed in the Soviet Union. They can fly more than 22 kilometers high in the stratosphere and belong to the 3rd or 4th generation. However, they did not make it into space, which starts at an altitude of 80 to 100 kilometers, depending on the definition. The 6th generation of fighter jets is considered a major technological advance. Germany, France and Spain are also planning a joint new jet, but it should not be operational until 2040. The multi-billion-dollar project Future Combat Air System had already shown a first model in 2019. It is still unclear whether the Chinese fighter jet will ever be realized in this form, and experts agree that this generation of fighter jets will use artificial intelligence and unmanned drones. Great Britain and Sweden also plan to enter the market in 2035. They presented their Tempest model for the first time in July. And in the USA, the Navy is also working on its own models in the NGDA development program. At least 10 people have been killed in bombings in northern Syria. Around 70 other people were injured in artillery fire by Syrian government troops. That's what the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights and the rescue organization White Helmets said last Sunday. Internationally outlawed cluster munitions are said to have been used. The attacks hit several refugee camps in the Idlib region. Russian warplanes are also said to have bombed positions. However, there were no details on this at first. Cluster munitions refer to many smaller explosive devices that are launched in containers from aircraft and from missile launchers. They are distributed randomly and extensively and explode. Many also end up in soil as duds, killing or injuring people years later. Most of the victims are civilians. And after more than 10 years of civil war, the region around Idlib is the last major rebel area in the country. Russia and Turkey, as protective powers of the Syrian government and opposition respectively, have agreed on a ceasefire for the long contested area. Since then, the violence has decreased. Nevertheless, attacks occur again and again, in which civilians are often killed. The conflict in Syria began in spring 2011 with protests against the government of ruler Bashar al-Assad. The government used violence against it. The head of state supporters now control around 2/3 of the country again. But a political solution is not in sight. For the first time since the corona pandemic, train services between Russia and North Korea have resumed. A first freight train made its way towards Pyongyang with a rather unusual load. On board were 30 Orlov trotters, that's luxury horses bred in Russia. The Russian veterinary service confirmed the transport, which took place through the Kazan-Tumangan border crossing. The animals, 5 stallions, 25 mares, were quarantined in the city of Suzdal in the Vladimir region and then arrived at the Kazan railway checkpoint in 3 specially equipped trucks for subsequent transport to North Korea. That's what the State Veterinary Service said of Russia in a statement. According to the Russian news agency RIA, medical supplies would follow later. Why North Korea needs the luxury horses is not known. Ruler Kim Jong-un is known for his love of horses and also likes to be photographed on them. According to the Reuters news agency, North Korea has paid thousands of dollars for thoroughbred horses from Russia in recent years. And according to a report by the Daily Mirror, Vladimir Putin gave the North Korea ruler Orlov trotters as a gift in 2003. The transport could be a counter-transaction. According to information from the United States government, North Korea supplies artillery ammunition to Russia in large quantities. Our evidence indicates that North Korea is shipping secretly, and we will be watching to see if the supplies are arriving, said Presidential National Security spokesman John Kirby. North Korea is trying to cover up the shipments by routing them through countries in the Middle East and North Africa, they say. The amounts are not insignificant, but cannot change the dynamics of the war. That's at least what Kirby said. North Korea said in September it had never supplied arms or ammunition to Russia and had no intention of doing so in the future. North Korea is among the few countries that have recognized the independence of occupied Ukrainian regions as Russia has wanted it. And that concludes this week's weekly magazine. I hope you visit my other channels in the meantime until we see us again here next week. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.